Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into some eye-opening stories from Reddit users who unexpectedly came into a lot of money and faced shocking experiences with people begging for cash. These tales reveal the challenges of sudden wealth and the unexpected reactions it can spark. Let's get started with the first story. Redditors who suddenly came into a lot of money. What's your horror story about people begging for it? I can share one, although it's still unfolding. Back in school, I wasn't exactly popular. I struggled academically and didn't put much effort into anything. Most of my time was spent hanging out with friends and just passing the time without much purpose. That all started to change when I met my wife. She inspired me to improve myself. I enrolled in a one-year software development course and eventually got a low-paying job. Not great, but it was a start, especially here in South Africa. When we found out we were expecting a child, most of my friends simply vanished. I guess not going out and partying anymore meant I wasn't useful to them. They stopped responding to my messages or picking up my calls. A few years later, I landed a high-paying remote position with a company based in San Francisco, earning over $200,000 annually. For context, the average software developer salary in South Africa is around $30,000. My wife was incredibly proud and shared a photo of me with our new car on Facebook. Within 20 minutes, I began receiving messages from those old friends who had ghosted me. Suddenly, they wanted to catch up and said they missed me. There was one friend I had always cared about, so I agreed to have dinner with him to see how life had treated him. We hadn't even ordered food when he told me I owed him money, saying that I should repay him for being there during the old days, and that keeping it all to myself was selfish. I quietly stood up and left. Eventually, I changed my phone number and deactivated my social media. Still, people continued to harass my wife and even my mother for money. That's not even the worst of it. After my grandmother passed away a week before Christmas, she left her house and a quarter of her modest fortune to me. The rest was divided among my brother and two cousins. Since then, my aunts and uncles, who act like country bumpkins, have constantly hounded me, insisting that the house and money are rightfully theirs. People I haven't spoken to in years have reappeared. Even my ex, who dumped me for a rugby player, started messaging me and inviting me out, even though she's still with the same guy. I'm not naive enough to give any of them money or rekindle old relationships. Fortunately, I have trustworthy friends and my brother to help keep me grounded. What was the total amount of the inheritance? $1.35 million. I was stunned when I found out. My grandmother had always called it a small little fortune. Are you going to sleep with your ex? Were you angry when she left? How long were you two together? Honestly, I've been tempted, but I haven't acted on it. I wasn't too upset about the breakup itself. I had hurt her too. What really annoyed me was learning she started seeing the rugby guy just a week and a half before we officially broke up. We were only 17 at the time, so it's been a while now. Here's another story. A little over a year ago, I won $5,000 on a scratch-off ticket my aunt gave me for my birthday. It was just a $2 ticket, and no one expected anything. I scratched it in front of everyone. People were thrilled, except my aunt. She demanded the ticket back because she had bought it. I even offered to split the winnings with her. Long story short, she took me to small claims court. The judge basically laughed at the case, and she walked away with nothing. I haven't spoken to her since. Here's one from a friend of mine. He placed second in a poker tournament and won $150,000. There were around 200 people watching. As is common, people started asking for lucky chips. It got out of hand. He was nearly mobbed. He had to be escorted by security and even paid a friend $300 to trail him in a separate car for 2 hours, just to make sure no one followed him home. That same friend told me another story. A poker player who had just won big left the casino, only to come running back in, screaming. Someone had rear-ended him on the road. When he stepped out of his car to check the damage, the driver mugged him. Turns out the guy had watched him win, followed him out, and caused the accident on purpose. The casino couldn't do anything about it. And here's another personal account. A few years after college, my girlfriend and I were living in a shared apartment with 5 others, 2 bedrooms and a couple of couches in the common area. I'd just received a big promotion at work. Financially, I was doing well, but we were still living in that communal setup because my girlfriend believed in the lifestyle. She thought her housemates would all become great writers or poets through shared experiences, but they were mostly unemployed or underemployed, and clearly moochers. I didn't want them to know I was saving money and planning to move out. Maybe with my girlfriend, maybe not. One day, one of the other couples got into a fight about rent, and then things started to unravel. After my girlfriend exposed my income to our roommates, showing them one of my pay stubs, they took it upon themselves to call an apartment meeting before I got home. When I walked in after work, I was ambushed. They informed me that since I was earning more, I should be contributing more fairly, and had already voted on it in my absence. I pointed out that I was already footing the bill for groceries, which they guilted my girlfriend into buying, and that I regularly topped up the emergency fund, unlike them, who kept withdrawing from it without replacing anything. I made it clear I wasn't going to start covering their rent too. The next day, while I was at work, someone entered my room and destroyed my laptop, the only valuable item I owned at the time. I packed the few things that mattered, told my girlfriend. We were over and walked out. The laptop incident was even messier than it first seemed. They claimed someone borrowed it because I wasn't using it, because, sharing is caring. Then supposedly someone else accidentally spilled water on it while it sat in the common area. No one took responsibility. Don't get mad. It's just life. Let us know when you get a new one, okay? Where are they now? Did they become the poets and philosophers they aspired to be? Well, 6 years later, my ex unknowingly applied for a job at my company. I'm now a senior officer there. She actually made it to the interview stage, which says something about her credentials, but didn't land the position. I didn't interfere either way. I wasn't interested in helping or hurting her chances. That's how I feel about all of them now. Once they left my life, they stopped mattering. Before the recession, my dad ran a small business that did pretty well, and we lived a stable middle-class life. He was always generous, lending money to his siblings, who frankly never amounted to much. They never repaid him, and continued to ask for more simply because he was doing well. When the economy crashed, our family had to sell assets, let go of insurance, and scrape by paycheck to paycheck. My dad worked 7 days a week to keep us afloat, and not one of those relatives he helped would offer us support. One uncle who owned a successful car dealership flat out refused to help, even though my dad had always honored his debts. None of his sisters ever paid back a single cent. Over the years, they caused so much stress that my parents nearly divorced. My father, drained emotionally and financially, spiraled into a near-alcoholic state. He's finally cut ties with all of them. They were toxic and greedy, and their behavior taught me a lot about the kind of people I want to keep out of my life. I'm just a regular guy in my mid-20s. My wardrobe consists mostly of $2 t-shirts and $10 jeans. But over time, word started to get out that I might have some money. It started with me buying a business in my tiny hometown. Add to that a rumor from a girl I went to school with who saw me on seeking arrangement, and some social media posts that showed me flying business class. It all snowballed. Lately, it feels like I've discovered an entire branch of my family tree I never knew existed. Along with dozens of people from school, many of whom I barely knew, suddenly claiming to be lifelong friends. I caught up with a classmate who genuinely knew me, and during coffee, she asked, "So, is it true you bought a plane?" The stories going around town had gotten absurd. It's honestly uncomfortable being back home since people act like I'm some jet-setting millionaire when I spend most of my time online in a hoodie under a blanket like everyone else. The worst part is the extended family. They constantly pester my parents and grandmother, who know little about my financial situation, for loans or handouts. A lot of these people I've never even met. It's not an exciting story, but it's been a persistent annoyance. I'm adopted, an only child in the US. I have an aunt who insists that since I'm not biologically related, I have no right to my parents' estate, which, by the way, is fairly substantial. Joke's on her. My dad made me the sole beneficiary of the family trust. My mother and her sisters haven't spoken in over a decade. My parents can't stand their relatives. I've seen them backstab each other repeatedly over inheritance issues. When my grandparents passed, the way they handled things was shameful. I'm bracing for conflict once my parents are gone, but it'll be a short one. Everything's already in order. My ex-husband's parents inherited a substantial amount of money. They gave us a chunk of it to take a trip to Disney. My in-laws were some of the best people I've ever known. Even after coming into a large inheritance, they stayed grounded. Money didn't change them. Sure, there was some drama. One long-lost relative tried to challenge the will, but the case was quickly thrown out. What did shock me, though, was their church. Their pastor, who had become unusually close to them, benefited heavily from their generosity. But when my father-in-law passed away and my mother-in-law decided to return to her smaller, lifelong congregation, that same pastor sent her a nasty letter and smeared her name to the entire church. It was just another reason I became an atheist. My own father's father was a pastor, and according to my dad, he'd go out of his way to cater to the wealthier members of the church. Got to keep that sweet tithe money flowing. In contrast, when my parents suddenly got rich, we moved into a huge house. I was 16 at the time and didn't notice any real shift in how people treated me. A few years later, in my early 20s, I found myself mostly hanging out with people who didn't come from money. I never really fit in with the posh crowd. I remember one friend asking for $20 to buy food. He paid me back 2 weeks later. I was careful with my money, and people respected that. I tried to treat my friends with love and respect, more than anything money could offer. Over the years, I found that poorer people have often been more generous with me than I've been with them. I wish I could say I've always deserved it. Slowly, I'm working on being a better person. I'm 30 now, and when my last parent passed, I inherited 14 properties. The number of people who suddenly came out of nowhere asking for money was astonishing. Unfortunately, I live in a state where estates become public record once probate is granted. I've since cut contact with all of them. I never asked them. For a dime, why did they feel so entitled to ask me? As for the properties themselves, most are one-bedroom residential units in the inner city of various Australian cities. They're not huge or extravagant, but their locations make them incredibly desirable and fast appreciating. The two exceptions are the family home I currently live in, a 5-bedroom house from the 60s that's been renovated over the years, and a holiday home in Sicily, which I haven't visited since inheriting it. At one point, I unexpectedly inherited what equated to about 4 years' worth of take-home pay. Before I knew how much it would be, I casually told my best friend I was expecting a few thousand. Her immediate response was to ask if I could take her on a trip to Europe. That was the biggest ask, but she made a series of smaller ones. 2. When the money actually came through, and it was a lot more than I anticipated, I didn't tell her. Instead, I began to quietly distance myself. I didn't tell any of my other friends either. Only my boyfriend knew, and he never asked for a thing. I did take him on that trip to Europe. We went to Portugal. Was my friend really that bad? On the surface, probably not. She didn't insist, and her request wasn't pushy. But there's a long history there of her taking advantage of me. Even before the inheritance, I had started pulling away. I told her I could no longer help with her rent or constantly drop my own life to tend to her emotional needs. I'm not in a high-paying field. I just show up and do the work, which she never could. My uncle was what you'd call working poor. Steady job, wife, kid, apartment, always living paycheck to paycheck. Then he won a small lottery, around $200,000. He and another winner split it. He left the apartment and bought the biggest house in the poorest part of town. Friends immediately started needing things. They always had someone crashing in the guest room. He bought 2 cheap new cars, but when property taxes came around, they were broke again, and just like that, he was back to being working poor. It reminded me of a story from my mom's childhood. Her father came into a large inheritance. He spent it quickly. A down payment on a house, a car, a color TV, and a handful of other things. But he didn't own any of it outright. Then he lost his job through no fault of his own, and everything unraveled. When my grandmother passed, her will stated that the estate would be split into 3. 1/3 to my mum, 1/3 to my uncle, and the last third divided between my sister and me. My uncle wanted to sell the house right away to maximize profit, but I wanted to keep it for sentimental reasons. My parents gave me a little help, and I used my entire inheritance to buy out his share. I paid my parents back over the next few years, and it was worth it. Over the past decade, real estate prices in our city have skyrocketed. The house is in a highly desirable neighborhood and has more than doubled in value, and it's still climbing. When I bought out my uncle's share of the house, its estimated value was around $300,000. Last year, a nearly identical home next door sold for $945,000. Since then, my uncle has repeatedly claimed that he's legally entitled to more money. Whenever I sell the house, that's complete nonsense. He's not getting another cent. I plan to live here for many more years, and honestly, he'll probably be gone by the time I ever sell. And yes, I got everything in writing. He even signed a disclosure stating he was fully bought out. No ambiguity. A friend of mine lost both of her parents just 4 months apart. They were older, so it wasn't entirely unexpected, but the loss was still devastating. I went to the first funeral, a small, quiet gathering of close friends. That's when I learned her parents had been mostly estranged from their families for decades. Neither side approved of the marriage, so they kept their distance. But at the second funeral, the story changed. Over 100 people showed up. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, niece and nephew imaginable. And in the reception area, I overheard several of them whispering about how much they might get from the inheritance. As it turned out, there was no will. Everything was split 50-50 between my friend and her brother. I didn't see the drama unfold firsthand, but my friend later told me all about it. A few relatives were kind, but most were horrid. They started out with fake kindness, and when that didn't get them anything, they turned nasty. One even threatened to keep my friend from seeing her nephew, as if she'd had more than 2 interactions with him in 10 years. On a different note, I took a gamble on my career path. I chose not to follow traditional medicine and instead opened a niche medical spa. Friends and professors alike said I was wasting my potential. I went from barely making $1,000 a month to clearing $4,000, $5,000 per day within just a few months. It wasn't a secret. My pricing was online, and the spa was fully booked 6 days a week. Simple math told the story. And suddenly, those same friends who thought I was crazy were calling, asking me to pay off their student loans. An ex-friend even texted me, demanding I teach them everything and fund their startup because I apparently owed them from our training days. Even the family wasn't any better. Cousins insisted I pay for vacations and luxury dinners, but refused to chip in a single dollar themselves. I've had to cut a few people off completely just to protect my peace. And then there's a story from a completely different corner of my life. Years ago, I dated a woman who eventually became a sex worker. She was always honest about it and genuinely seemed to enjoy her work. Her perspective was, if people are going to objectify me anyway, I might as well get paid and avoid a 9 to 5. Fair enough, I didn't judge. Fast forward 10 years. We lived in different states by then, but still stayed in touch. She was one of the few constants in my life during some very dark times. We supported each other with no expectations. At some point, she opened up about being burned out and wanting to leave that line of work. She had a plan, school, a new start. Around that same time, I had inherited a decent amount of money, nothing insane, but enough to live comfortably. And honestly, I wasn't in a good place mentally. I was actively trying to drink myself to death and came dangerously close to succeeding, so I didn't care much about the money. I gave her $10,000 to help her start over. No loan, no strings attached. Just a gift. Whether she used it for school, drugs, or something else entirely, I don't know. She disappeared after that. Cut off all contact. After 12 years of friendship, she vanished. I'm not angry. I survived and I still have money. And for many years, she was a rock when no one else was. I think her demons finally caught up with her. She might be ashamed, or she might be gone. Either way, it hurt deeply. And then there's my own story of feeling like the one asking for help. I was married, we had 2 sons, and my father-in-law suddenly passed away. My husband inherited $500,000. We had agreed that the money would go toward our kids' college education to give them the best start possible. But then I found out he put it into a separate account, in his name only. Ouch. I told him if I had won the lottery or inherited money, I would never treat him the way he treated me. He ignored that. Later, my husband decided he wouldn't use a cent of his inheritance for our son's college education, despite us both agreeing years earlier that's exactly what it was for. Instead, he insisted we cover tuition from our regular salaries. I told him that was unfair. I couldn't afford to cover all the expenses and still save for retirement. Again, he ignored me. After our son graduated, it became clear he planned to spend his inheritance entirely on himself and his sons, on his terms. And yet, he still expected me to chip in for dinners, vacations, anything that made him look good. And he changed. He became cold, short-tempered, always criticizing, always shouting. Eventually, I walked away, because it was better to be poor and happy than rich and miserable. He made sure I didn't see a single cent of that money during the marriage, or even in our divorce. And you know what? He used to be a much better man before he got that money. I've often wondered, did he know the marriage was ending? Did he intentionally isolate his inheritance to protect it from being split? Legally, inheritances aren't considered joint property in most divorces. Maybe he was planning his exit long before I was. I really believe that if that inheritance had never come, we'd still be together. Back then, we were partners, just 2 young parents, trying to raise 2 boys and survive the coming college years. It was us against the world, but money changes everything. My own experience with inheritance came when my father died in a motorcycle accident. The settlement changed my life, but not without incredible pain. His girlfriend was furious. When she learned he'd left everything to me, she didn't even wait for the funeral. She just snapped. One night, she rented 2 U-Hauls. She and her brother emptied my dad's house, furniture, food, even his clothes. When I finally got there, everything was gone. Everything, except a few empty soda cans and a couple of old t-shirts on the floor. She even took a calendar I made for my dad for Father's Day, just construction paper and glued-on photos. No monetary value, just memories. And she stole them. Then she started selling his belongings online, his tools, fishing gear, while I was still trying to process the loss. She even ran a fake GoFundMe, pretending the money was for his funeral, and pocketed over $10,000 from his co-workers. I was the one who paid for the service. We tried going to the police, but the response was lukewarm at best. Last I heard, she fled to a town in another state. I don't even know if anything came of it. Emotionally, it's still too much to deal with, and I've had to accept that she probably destroyed or sold everything. It's been 2 years now. It's still horribly sad. Before we even held the funeral, she was blowing up my phone, angry voicemails, pounding on my door, even contacting my mother with threats. And at that point, I hadn't received anything yet. It takes months to process. These settlements, I was just a broke, scared kid. And I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, thinking she was just grieving poorly. I really hoped things would settle down. Then, 2 or 3 days after the funeral, my aunt called in a panic. The girlfriend had threatened to burn down my dad's house. We rushed over. The house was still standing, but the doors were hanging wide open. Inside, everything was gone. Neighbors told us they saw her and her brother loading up trucks. But they didn't call the police because they recognized her as my dad's girlfriend, so they looked the other way. My dad wanted me to be safe, to be financially secure. That's why he left me what he did. But I didn't just say, "Good luck," and walk away from them. I wanted to help. I had planned to help. She made that impossible. If I could go back and change things, I would, but I can't.